For Gen Z, I really hope we can get to a place where Bitcoin is like this economic oxygen that kind of exists in the background and help give life to your life, whatever passions you have, the purposes that you feel.
How has Bitcoin changed your life and your approach to your professional career?
If you consider Bitcoin to be an infinite game where you don't exist in this system, like today with fiat money, it's just programmed to debase over time, then are you ever really late? You can play it forever if, generations after you can keep engaging in the system.
Hello, Ella.
Hi, Kyle. Thank you for having me.
The pleasure is mine. I thought a good place to start the conversation would be a big question.
Okay.
Bitcoin is many different things to different people. As you know, in the West, it's a store of value. In other places, it's more of a freedom tool and a medium of exchange. But I'm curious, what is Bitcoin to Gen Z?
At first, I thought you were going with what is Bitcoin to me, and my head was in my thesis, which I just turned in last night, answering that question. But for what is it to Gen Z, I think, I don't know if this is a great analogy, but I sort of came up with Bitcoin as economic oxygen. So if you think about just air, oxygen, we all need it to breathe, kind of do what brings us joy, gives us life, but we don't really, think about it every day, every second, kind of just exists in the background and works for us. For Gen Z, I really hope we can get to a place where Bitcoin is like this economic oxygen that kind of exists in the background and help give life to, your life, whatever passions you have, the purposes that you feel, and really just lets you have greater agency and choice over how you show up in your life.
It's a beautiful answer, and I did some homework on you. I learned a little bit about your backstory. You talked about growing up and asking the question of, how can I support myself in this world? I had a very similar experience where I had numbers were easy for me. So I just did some back of the napkin math. I'm like, how am I going to afford a car, rent, food, when the average income is less than all those things? So basically my question is, how has Bitcoin changed your life and your approach to your professional career?
Thank you. Well, I think I'm very lucky that I found Bitcoin in high school. So before I started college, before I started working, really earning my own salary, like building my nest egg. So that was hugely helpful. And I think, generally most people don't do like the back of the napkin calculation of how much is everything going to cost to live? What do I need? And so actually when the whole reason I went down this process of doing it is because I was sitting with my parents and I made the comment that I really wanted to be a history major. And I loved history, loved kind of the story element of it. And they were like, no, let's just, talk this out. They were very pragmatic about not just a no, but here's why we think a different option would be better. And we did exactly what you just described. We opened a spreadsheet and we literally listed, okay, what's the average salary of someone who graduates with a history major? Where do you think you want to live? What's your tax bracket? What's all your expenses? How much are you saving for retirement? I mean, the whole thing. And then very clearly got a big negative number and had to kind of, regroup. But all of that was before I started college and really before I was well into my way in high school. So then I could really think about what jobs or what I was interested in that I could support myself with. And I kind of joke now, in a way, I think I did become a history major in some elements because I think Bitcoin teaches you a lot about how the world has worked, so you can try to understand how it will work. But I would say it's really important for young people to do that and have the conversation about money and why money is, additive to their life. So then you don't have to think about it again. You can just, like I was saying earlier, get back to what you want to do.
That is exactly been my experience. And finances is a very touchy and hard subject to talk about for a lot of people. It's the number one cause of divorce, and it's just stressful. So I'm curious how some of these conversations between you and your peers are. When I hear you speak, I think, hey, she's thinking about these things in a logical way, not letting emotions sort of just take you away from, because it's very easy to become sort of just pessimistic once you run the numbers and you're like, well, how am I going to support myself? So I guess how are there any stories of people who you've interacted with that have come along this journey with you, and can you talk a little bit about those stories?
Yeah, actually, I can give you one that happened last week. And I'll preface with, I think the most important thing you can do to kind of also get to the story is just listen. I think most people
Mm-hmm.
kind of know this, but sometimes it's a good reminder for myself that before I launch into my Bitcoin spiel, what are their concerns? What are they interested in? Because at the end of the day, every decision we make just comes back to, what are we really here for? What am I really trying to do? What matters to me? And then, you chart a strategy to help you achieve that. But so a story, well, I guess this has taken place over the past couple weeks, but on April 12th, a month ago, I gave a TED Talk, TEDx talk at my school about Bitcoin.
Of
And
course.
sort of, how it talked about the overarching message was not about Bitcoin, more to the why are we here.
Mm.
But I introduced the analogy in it of Bitcoin like time and how when you save in, the broken monetary system we have today and fiat and anything that's not Bitcoin really, you're kind of losing time over time. And so one person, I'd never met him before, he came up afterwards and he sort of said, paraphrasing, I really thought I was going to disagree with everything you had to say. I'm not interested in money and Bitcoin. I thought it was all a scam. But, when someone's really passionate about something, which you clearly are, I'm curious the underlying motivations and reasons. And so he's like, can we get coffee? And so we did, and it was great. And turns out what he's really interested in is human centered math, basically, how math impacts humans around the world. And so I learned this when we were chatting briefly after the talk. And I sent him an article, I think it was maybe from Unchained, about, Bitcoin's math equation. And sort of just introduced, like, look how this math equation is changing the world. And told him a little bit about the study we're doing here at Cornell looking at Bitcoin adoption and financial freedom in 25 countries. And now, like, we had a lovely conversation, and now he's kind of on his learning path with Bitcoin. Other friends, I think perspective, which world you've grown up in, influences how you think about it. A lot of my friends are not from the US, and their families from like Russia or Iran. And so for them, it didn't take many conversations at all to kind of understand the use case for Bitcoin. But I think it's more interesting, honestly, if you get past just the money conversation, because then I think when you start to really understand it, you get more of a sense of like optimism and hope and a want to kind of engage with the future. But today, I mean, you're talking about financial stress leading to divorce rates. Like loneliness is, all-time high. Younger generations, especially Gen Z, doesn't feel optimistic about the future. They list financial concerns as like the number one concern, and they don't want to set goals. And so with Bitcoin, I just think you have the opportunity to change the direction that all of that is going.
Absolutely, you do. And you're talking about a theme which I've witnessed as well. The financial nihilism, maybe,
Yeah.
is a way to describe it. Just basically,
Yeah.
the idea is like, I'm never going to be able to save for the life that I want. So screw it. Let's put it on red. Let's, go to, we're all going to Vegas next week. So I hope all the Bitcoiners still have some sats left over after that. But let me take us back. I want to ask you because I started a health and fitness club, and I know how hard it is to start a club at a university. The red tape that you got to get through. Talk to me about some of the challenges in starting it, what you learned along the way, and then also some of the wins that you've had so far. With
Yes,
sorry,
thank you.
you have a lot of things going on, specifically with the Bitcoin Club, but then maybe also open up to some of the other projects you're working on.
For sure, I'll tee it up to talk about the Students Network because challenges kind of evolved into the Students Network. So yes, as you know, it's difficult to start a club, and I think also so because at this point, universities have so many clubs that already exist. Here, I think it's over 1,000, and so when you go to them, like, hey, can I start a club? It's sort of like, okay, how does this like? could this possibly already be counted in one of the other 1,000 clubs that exist? Do you really need to start your own? So that's kind of the first hurdle. Um, and for me, in my case, you also needed to have 10 initial members join with you and a faculty advisor. And this was, I was just getting to Cornell. I transferred my sophomore year and wanted to start a Bitcoin club, was learning all this. And I didn't know 10 people yet, didn't know faculty to serve as the club advisor. And so I joined the blockchain club. And, I thought, hey, this is okay. I can have a friend group. I'm sure there's some Bitcoiners in there. And then it just kind of got to a point my junior year where I said, Ella, you know way more than 10 people now. You can definitely get a professor. And I started the Bitcoin Club. And then within that, there's a lot of I'm sure you had to go through all this operational type challenges of like, oh, the Constitution, how many meetings can someone miss before they're not eligible to be a member anymore?
Dues. Yeah.
Yeah, the whole thing. And so I went through all these steps, and then still really no idea what I'm doing, but kind of just trying as I go, figuring it out. Started with, no one. And then now in the second semester or third semester, we're up to like 130 people.
Wow.
And I've transitioned it over to a new group last semester. But I would say that's a huge win. What I wanted was what success looks like to me is just if we can have people together to have a conversation that otherwise wouldn't exist. Another motivation for starting the club was I was on the journey of being able to pursue Bitcoin for my studies. And that's another really long process. And so, I just said, Ella, like, Bitcoin is very grassroots, bottom up. Students are probably, it's going to take a while for them to hear about Bitcoin in a top down manner. Let's lean into this bottom up ethos and, you start the conversation and you create that focal point of people to gather and meet and build community. That's another big element. And, also some skills along the way for this world that we are moving into. And so once I did all of that, with my co-founder, Arsh Malu, who's at the Human Rights Foundation, we kind of let's make this, a more official thing. How can we ease the journey for students everywhere? Not just, here in Ithaca, but anywhere in the world. And so we started the Bitcoin Students Network and basically kind of open source all the materials to start a club. We have an incredible board of advisors as well, and speakers, eventually financial resources, internships. And you mentioned Vegas. We're doing a student ticket with them. So the Bitcoin conference very kindly for the second year is offering free student tickets to any student. And so now we're up to 73-ish countries with the Students Network. And so, really just helping people create the little conversation community that otherwise might not exist.
I think it's a really well articulated definition of success. I like to ask people, what is your definition of success? Because life is a journey, and if you are all about getting to the top of the mountain, you're going to miss all the enjoyable views along the way. Yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you about was you mentioned being an introvert, but you're also stepping into the place of being a leader of this club. Do you have any experiences? What have you learned along the way of, dealing with the fact that you're naturally, maybe you don't love being in front of a big group? Just talk a little bit about that process.
Yeah, I am a huge introvert, but I think another, way I try to navigate life is do things that scare me and do things that are hard.
Smart.
I think you grow a lot through that. And so, I just kind of looked around and I was like, well, I'm probably not the best person to do this, but I can do this. I can take this step. And so you just start walking. And I will say, I think the Bitcoin community is incredibly, incredibly supportive. There's people left and right that want to help you and see you succeed. And so, I have I'm doing this in like the most supportive environment there could be.
Hmm.
And it's a huge gift, every day, or maybe not every day lately because I've been a little too focused on school these past couple weeks, but, to get on the phone call with someone in Malawi or in Italy. And, I think to go back, what is your definition of success? Mine is really rooted in people. And so um, I, it doesn't like, I don't feel any pain or stress being an introvert and getting to do all of this. I think I'm very grateful for it. But after big social events, I have to kind of come and hibernate.
What do the conversations look like at the club? What do you guys talk about? What are some of the topics? Or just like, what is the format of the club? I'm curious.
Yeah, so the format's definitely in progress, and I have to give a big shout out to the Bit Polito group in Italy. So they really preceded the Bitcoin Students Network. They're at the University of Turin in Italy, and their club is just like the Bitcoin standard, gold standard of what a club could look like, because they now have established like a master's program with their university. They have a lot of different sort of sub or project teams, kind of in different areas with Bitcoin, and they've also had a lot of people go and work in Bitcoin in different fields. But to go back to what is the format, honestly, it really depends on the person leading the club. It depends on the knowledge base of the people in the club, and it depends on the interests of people in the club. So how I started it, I felt there should be a good baseline knowledge of a lot of different areas. Cornell, I think, uniquely sort of has like 8 or 9 different colleges and schools. And so there's people studying all different things. And how I structured this club, which is very unique compared to others, is that it was open to anyone of any kind of degree program, major, anything. You could come. And so the first semester, we had a lot of different guest speakers kind of cover all different areas, like some technical, philosophy, um, the financial side of it. And that it was more of like a speaker series then.
Hmm.
The second semester was introduced some more projects as well as some speakers. But, hey, we've been around a semester. People know more than they did previously. And if you're new, everything's recorded. You could go back and watch. Let's do some more actionable engaging, because I think that's you have to make it. You can't just be receptive. There needs to be kind of expressive doing pieces of it. And so we launched the study. We also had a couple different related projects that people worked on. And then this semester, the new leaders have taken it even further. And I did a little bit of a hybrid, some with like the student e-board, or we called them like their minor board. They like led educational sessions, but then we also had projects and we also had speakers.
Okay, so it's evolving and it's becoming more interactive. I think that's
Yeah.
extremely valuable. Just a little random tangent here. There's a guy, a friend of mine, Hector Alvarez. Have you
Yeah.
met him?
I
Yeah,
think
he's
yeah.
when I think about teaching Bitcoin, he's the guy that comes to mind.
Mm-hmm.
I've watched a couple of his talks. One of them in El Salvador. He just
Yeah.
talks about how if you want your students to start learning, stop
Mm-hmm.
teaching.
Yeah.
And he makes all these great analogies like, do you remember when you learned how to walk? No, you don't. No one taught you how to walk. You figured it out yourself. So
Yeah.
humans learn more by doing than by listening.
Sure.
I love that. Another thing you said, which I really appreciated from Ben's podcast, was always be collecting dots and connecting dots. And you also just talked about how supportive the Bitcoin community is. Can you talk a little bit how students are thinking about tapping into this network in order to support their journey, even if it's not into the Bitcoin industry? Are
Mm-hmm.
students grappling with that? Hey, how can this be something that I utilize for me to then go pursue what I really want in life?
Yeah, for sure. So, where I was kind of first thinking as you were asking the question, a lot of Bitcoin companies don't necessarily need you to be a Bitcoiner per se. A lot of them want you to still be good at your job, whatever skill it is. And so, a lot of people think to be interested in Bitcoin, that is like your only interest, or not your only, but a big one. And part of that I feel is a bit from the existing club nature and structure. You have classes. There's only so much time. You have your classes, friends, like athletics, and then your clubs normally serve a purpose of, how can I learn skills, meet alumni, for whatever industry I want to enter. Maybe you join like some more fun ones as well. But I think a Bitcoin club sits at the intersection of those because, one, I just think everyone should know about Bitcoin as like a tool in their toolkit for their life. But then also, as you mentioned, you might be a student who wants to enter the industry and work in the industry. And so you might be, a computer science student and you're just looking for software engineering internships. They don't need to be Bitcoin specific, but maybe River has a posting for a job and you really want to go there. Or Marathon has a growth strategy internship and you're a business student and that's what you're interested in. And so I think, that's a balance people kind of figure out as they learn more. I talked to a student last week, and he just started a club, and he's done an incredible job with it. But he's kind of at this crossroads of, okay, I've done everything, planned everything for a traditional finance track, but my heart really isn't in that. I want to find a place in Bitcoin. And so to, answer your question with an open-ended answer, it a little bit depends on the person and what they're
Totally.
looking for, and, really where their heart is.
100%. And the way I think about it, I'm 30, so I'm like still young enough where I have a long career ahead of me.
Mm-hmm.
But the reason why I honed in on that always be connecting dots and collecting dots is because you don't know what you want to be doing in 10 years from now. I literally do not know. I hope I'm doing another podcast with an awesome human being like yourself. But what I think is that by having a network of people who share your same values, they value freedom, education, sovereignty, agency, you can kind of you have more optionality in the future, because even if you don't want to work as a software engineer, the Bitcoin industry will grow. The people who are building in Bitcoin will need to hire other folks. And so I just see it as like investing in, that's why I traveled all these conferences, like just building out my network of people in the Bitcoin space. I think there's probably not a better use of my time. So I appreciate that you guys are thinking about that as well.
Yeah, and to what you were just saying, I think, the future is inherently uncertain. Like I think that's a good, feature of the future.
Thank
Um,
goodness. Yeah.
yeah, and if you can just work and this is why I really love Jeff Booth's framing of this, of, which system do I want to build, kind of which framework do I want to kind of base my life in. For me, I really resonated with the values that Bitcoin embodies. And I was like, okay, this is the framework that I want to walk the rest of my life in. I think you end up to the best spot you can if you follow what resonates with your core.
Absolutely. And to your point, everyone's so different, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not everyone's meant to be cut out to be an entrepreneur to start the club. Other people, we all just have different roles and different desires in life.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate that. Let me see. So 69 countries, 70 countries for the Bitcoin Students Network.
Yeah, and I should just add like a little asterisk. It doesn't mean there's a club in all of those countries, but
Mhm.
that's the reach of the network, of students that talk to, connected with.
I also heard your first Bitcoin conference was in Prague, which it might be the best conference that I've ever been to. It's incredible.
Did you
What
go
were
this past year, or what year
Yeah,
did you go?
this
Okay.
past year, yeah.
Yeah.
And it's this city where it's a low time
Huge
preference city,
history. Yeah.
right? Yeah. And yeah, I'm just curious, like how traveling, going to these conferences has opened you up or changed your perspective. What that experience, just going outside the United States specifically, what lessons have you learned?
Yeah, I think just for outside of Bitcoin, being able to travel is a huge gift.
Hmm.
And that was my first Bitcoin conference. I really didn't know what to expect. I mean, I'd been to, the Houston Bitcoin meetup. I had, listened to lots of podcasts, books, all of that, but had never really been. And the energy is different in these
100%.
spaces. So that's a huge in the good way I should say,
Yeah.
in a very positive way. um, I think it's meeting people one in person is so different from online, and it's really special to be able to go to these places where Bitcoin is being used more than it is, here in my bubble in the US.
Hmm.
And I think you just, like, on the personal level, you kind of gain confidence, like who you are, more removed from your local, orbit of where you are. So I would, definitely recommend, if you can go to a conference, people to go and be able to meet people. And I should say the Oslo Freedom Forum was my first conference that kind of made me a Bitcoiner. At that time, they didn't have the Bitcoin or the financial freedom track that they do now. That was in 2022. And basically, I sat in that conference center for those days. And I finally was able to connect the human side of
Mm.
Bitcoin to Bitcoin. And then that's when I say it really fell down the rabbit hole and started all the stuff that I get to do now.
That's incredible. So for you, the hook was really connecting the human side of it. That is very beautiful. Um, have you thought about just what the future looks like in on a Bitcoin standard? I'm curious, just your personal perspective. Do we live in a hyper Bitcoinized world? Do we, live in a fiat world where we just store our value in Bitcoin and we still are under the power of the fiat system? Have you I just wondering if you've ever kind of thought through what the future might look like, and if that's a conversation in the club or with your friends.
Yeah, I have. It's been more either kind of written recently or just in my head. Last year at the Bitcoin Atlantis conference, I was on a panel in Jeff Booth's block that he organized. I think it was titled The Rise of Consciousness on a Bitcoin Standard, or something of that nature. And I definitely am not saying that right now we're all walking around unconscious, but I think I kind of have this. So we know the Cantillon effect. Basically, the closer you are to the money printer, the less pain you feel. The further away you are from the money printer, like the world reserve currency, the more pain you feel, because you are just, the inflation is so much higher for you there. You're not earning, just your wages in, let's say, the US dollar. And with that, I almost feel like there's like a reverse effect with consciousness. So the closer you are to the money printer, the more privilege, check your financial privilege that you have to maybe not think about, oh, well, I wake up tomorrow and 13% of my, I've lost 13% of my savings. This like happened in Libya a couple weeks ago. You don't feel that. But if you live in a country that, does experience more pain on a day-to-day basis, you might be a little bit more aware about, okay, what are other options that exist? How can I fix this? What is Bitcoin? So there's that element. But I would recently, in my thesis that I was writing, I talk about Bitcoin and linguistics. And right now, there exists this tension between identity and intelligibility, or basically just understanding of oneself and someone else. And very often, economic dominance precedes linguistic dominance. And so then, like if you look at Nigeria, for instance, it has more languages than I think any other country. There's like 500 languages, but English is the one of the official languages. And so there is this tension or this trade-off of, what part of my culture, my identity, do I need to give up so that I can speak kind of the global economic language and be understood? on an international level. Like 19 out of the top 20 universities in the world are in the US or the UK. And so there's this trade off that exists. But I feel like on a Bitcoin standard, it's a nice thought to think that, okay, maybe people don't need to give up their identity, their culture, to be able to participate as fully as they want in this world, for anyone, anywhere. Like, what does this idea of borderlessness, how does that impact other areas of our life? And permissionless, like, how do these things that are all in Bitcoin and the protocol, what is then the effect on the human and culture when those get to play out?
Wow. Yeah, it's the way I see it is it's a changes the incentives for sure. Individuals can move across countries in a way that they couldn't before. And I see this like digital nomad trend being really big. I'm curious if that's a topic that comes up for you at all, like this idea of how do I build a living and a lifestyle where I can be location agnostic, if you will,
Yeah.
and how Bitcoin might play a role in that.
I think it's nice in theory. I live my life very kind of people centered, and so I haven't lived at home for 8 years, and I miss not being able to be closer to my family or see them, and so maybe it's nice if that means that you can be a digital nomad, but with the people that you really care about and spend time
Well
with.
said. Yeah.
But I don't think personally, I don't want to just kind of be, digital nomad anywhere just because I can and not kind of build the community that I really enjoy and I think gives a lot of meaning to my life.
Totally. And I guess where I was even more importantly is like people that would not have access to sell products around the world now
Oh,
can,
got
because
it.
previously
Okay.
they'd have
Yeah.
to go through
Yeah.
Visa and all the banks, and it's
Yeah.
just at a certain point it becomes economically not viable.
Yeah.
So I do think, and then I have this other theory. I'm curious what you think about this. When the call it like the progressive left type of folks that are very like activism oriented, they see there's problems in the world and they want to make a change, like they have their hearts in the right place. My theory is that when they find Bitcoin, it's going to be like a glacial waterfall coming down, unstoppable. So do you think Bitcoin is potentially a tool that can unite us, and do you see people who are in that kind of, call it the left kind of activism oriented folks, latching onto Bitcoin at all?
Yeah, I mean, I would just preface anyone listening, if you haven't read Jason Meyer's book, A Progressive's Case for Bitcoin, that's a great book. He actually just spoke to the Cornell Club a couple weeks ago, and some of his students joined us as well, which was amazing. And, on the will it unite us, I definitely think Bitcoin can unite when you can just, money holds so much power. And so if you can just remove the power from these centralized, institutions and people that don't have someone's best wishes in mind, then yes, it's a powerful uniting force. But I also think there's people with all different opinions within Bitcoin. Sometimes, like friends or people that join the club, it's like, oh, but everyone eats meat, and, all the stereotypes that you kind of hear. And really, that's not necessarily the case. Like, I was vegan for like 7 years, and so it gets everyone. And, I do think, what is the quote? Like, Bitcoin is for anyone, but not for everyone. And so, really, I think when people from all different perspectives, walks of life, learn about it and what it can do for them and their family and their friends, it's just rational to kind of adopt it. But I will say most people, so we're doing this study at Cornell, and it's like in the single digits of the percent of people that know that there's even a supply cap. And
Oh
so,
yeah,
people
the
say like,
information.
yeah,
Sorry, go ahead.
people say, oh, I've never met someone who knows about the difficulty adjustment and is against Bitcoin. I mean, I think we could almost lower the threshold a little bit. It's like, do you know about the supply cap?
Totally. I had a guy at the coffee shop the other day telling me he had this theory of, oh, well, Bitcoin is infinitely divisible, so therefore, technically, there's infinite Bitcoin. And I was trying to explain, like, man, that's not how math works.
Yeah.
But no, I love those conversations. When someone asks you, Ella, I'm too late to Bitcoin. I wish I was born in 1994, like, I was or whatever. And, you were already earning money when Bitcoin was starting to grow. What's your response to the am I too late question?
I think it's easiest to answer it with facts and just kind of like level set the conversation a little bit. So, for instance, okay, 97% of the Bitcoin has been mined, is, out there in the world. But, like, I think River, what did they say? Less than 4% of the world actually owns Bitcoin. And so then just flip the narrative. And hey, you're here before 96% of the world. That's not late. And also, if you think about, uh, so in game theory, there's this idea of like finite games, infinite games. And for me, I think of Bitcoin as an infinite game. Because of how Bitcoin embodies sound monetary principles. And so if you consider Bitcoin to be an infinite game where you don't exist in this system that, like today with fiat money, it's just programmed to debase over time, then are you ever really late? If you can play it forever, if generations after you can keep engaging in the system. So I just Troy Cross, really early on in my Bitcoin journey, he gave me a piece of advice. When you're having a conversation with someone, it's better to ask how they came to understand something rather than why. So pretty much always I try to stop myself and get to the how, because it also then takes away any ownership someone feels over that idea if it's wrong.
Yeah, and Bitcoin, Jeff Booth's company is called Ego Death, right?
Mm-hmm.
Bitcoin, in order to accept it into your life, you have to admit that you didn't have a fully formed picture of the world, right? And it's a humbling and sometimes painful experience. So your mom is a Bitcoiner, and she was one of the first Bitcoiners that I followed when I really started
Oh,
getting
cool.
into the space. Yeah, a friend of mine recommended her, and I'm just curious how having your mom in the space has impacted your journey. Has she helped you learn? Has she helped you navigate some of these hard decisions? Like, just talk a little bit about your guys' relationship.
Yeah, sure. I think it's always nice if you can do something with someone else, especially as you're navigating a new topic. We found Bitcoin separately, but at the
Wow.
same time, pretty much she was a little bit earlier than me, like a couple months or so maybe. But I first learned about it in a high school class. And then we were both taking like the Gary Gensler MIT Open Courseware, like blockchain and money class on YouTube. And so we could talk about that. So yeah, it's been really nice to be able to have someone to have the conversations of, or just, hey, I'm thinking through this idea, or navigating this new concept. What do you think? Um, I will also say my dad has been helpful too in the conversations, and just how this fits into the world as a whole. Um, I really think you can learn something from pretty much everybody, because we all have a different experience of life and how the puzzle pieces go together. But yeah, talking to both of them, because I was also learning just how the world currently works, and how, I took macroeconomics the year before I learned about Bitcoin. So all of this just generally was pretty new. Um, and I was kind of, making the pro con list, trying to understand how they're similar or different.
I didn't know. Is your dad in the Bitcoin space as well?
No, no, he's not. But just talk to him about it.
Cool, very cool. Yeah, I love it. I've been trying to orange pill my parents for a while, and it's a process. I'm patient. I understand that being in an older generation, it can be harder to just reevaluate things that have been solid, accepted facts for such a long time. So you have a very unique experience. The fact that you guys figured it out kind of together, I really appreciate that. Um, let's see. Oh, you talked about you screened Dirty Coin, and you're going to screen God Bless Bitcoin. So I'm making a documentary film this summer in Bulgaria about building on Bitcoin, very grassroots movement over there, a lot of different projects. And I'm just curious if you have any advice for me, or just thoughts on where Bitcoin cultural stories and narratives could be bolstered, or things that you've seen successful in those films. Like, just any thoughts on cultural narratives in Bitcoin and the importance of that?
Yeah, I might answer your question with a question, but also
Yeah.
I'm curious because so for a class I'm writing this paper. It's a networks class and I'm kind of doing it on Bitcoin and like technical and social networks inside of it. And I have like 740 data points, but only one from Bulgaria. So now I'm curious. I didn't know there was so much going on there, which is really cool.
Totally.
Um, but so when I set out to write this thesis, Femi at the Human Rights Foundation presented this framework to me called the Johari window. Have you heard of this?
I have not. Please explain.
So, okay, so basically, it's a table with four quadrants, and basically it portrays like information that is known or unknown or kind of hidden or only shown to some people. And the point being, when you tackle a project or think about what should I write about, what documentary should I make, what should I do, you want to get into the fourth quadrant, which is the unknown quadrant, which it's like, what are things that I don't know? What are things that no one else knows? And so for you, I would I don't really have the answer, but maybe think about what do you not know and what do you not think anyone else knows?
Very interesting. You
Yeah.
have got me thinking on that. I mean, as a storyteller, that's the whole thing, right? It's my journey to go learn and discover what's happening there, and
Mm-hmm.
put the narrative together all in one. So,
Yeah.
thank you for that. And if you do need data points in Bulgaria, I've got a
Thank
Rolodex
you.
of folks that would love to help out. They're just very they're great people over there. I went there last summer, right before
Yeah.
Prague, made some friends,
Very
and
cool.
one of them invited me back. They said, "Look, we have all these disparate projects, and we don't really have a way to tie them all together other than a
Yeah.
conference.
Yeah.
So we are putting our heads together, and after the conference in Prague, I'll be in Bulgaria for about a month.
Wow. Cool.
So yes, that is my big project, other than this podcast this year.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to in Las Vegas next week?
Really, all the students that I'll get to meet. Most of it's all just digital on the screen, and so it'll be nice to see people in person.
How does someone like Natalie Brunell, how is she a role model or mentor to you, and how does seeing someone like her kind of paving the way in the Bitcoin space,
Yeah.
how do you like learn from her or apply some of the things that you've learned to your own life?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, Natalie is really like I credit her for, so much because she had me on her show when really it was just, the Bitcoin Students Network hadn't launched yet. My degree hadn't launched, like really nothing. And so she was huge. Like she has played such a big part in my Bitcoin journey. But she definitely is a model of she's very eloquent when she speaks and when she talks about a topic or an issue and how she frames questions and researches new topics and really how she brings people together. I mean, now I think the Women of Bitcoin brunch is in its fourth or fifth year, and over 500 people, and so I think I've learned a lot from that of, okay, how can I try to foster community? How can I try to bring people in that might be not currently included? And how can, you really deliver a message in, the best possible way?
Beautiful. Any final words? That's pretty much all I've got today. But oh, sorry, I'm so sorry. I was going to ask you
Okay.
one other
Yeah.
thing. So, you said a thesis and a bunch of research on attitudes and understanding around Bitcoin. Can you just tell me a little bit about what the goal is, why you're doing it, and what you're learning along the way?
Yeah, so kind of three things in there. One, and I touched on this a little bit, we're doing the Bitcoin adoption and financial freedom study in the Cornell Brooks Tech Policy Institute. And this is a 2-year study funded by the Human Rights Foundation and the Reynolds Foundation to basically, what does Bitcoin adoption look like in 25 countries around the world? Historically, there has never been a Bitcoin-only kind of adoption survey. There's been crypto more broadly by Chainalysis. They've done it pretty consistently. nothing just Bitcoin. And so there's two parts to it. There's 25,000 surveys that have been sent out and we have the data back on. And then there's about 250 interviews. So we want to try to get into the nuance and not just be limited at what the surveys tell us, but what are the stories we're missing. And so that's where the interviews come in. And there's a variety of goals at the end that we hope for this report that will come out next May. Everything from what products should be built, what education do we need to focus on, why are people adopting or not adopting Bitcoin, what are the pain points, and then all the way to what should policymakers know. What should regulators know about Bitcoin? Like, what is the story? Because none of us really know quantitatively and qualitatively. That's one. And then last spring, I was just in this class. It was about like mind, emotion, cognition, something of that nature. And we had to design a research proposal. And as every paper I've written basically during my time here where I made it about Bitcoin. And I might have also done this for a different paper, for this like event cognition class. Both of them basically got to what does sort of culture have to do with how you think about complexity and simplicity and understanding Bitcoin, and also how does Bitcoin impact, if at all, how we perceive events. There's this quote in The Sovereign Individual about how often we miss transitions as they're underway. And so really I was just curious, if this whole low time preference thing is real, will we be able to more clearly see events as they unfold? There's those two. And then the thesis, there is kind of like a network theory section of it, thinking about Bitcoin adoption, but it's a little bit more theoretical.
So your next 6 to 12 months, what does it look like? What are you working on? Do you graduate pretty soon here?
Yeah, next week, I think, maybe, or the week after. Actually, it might be next week.
Wow.
I should look at the calendar.
Oh my
And
goodness. That's amazing.
yeah, so exams this week. Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, graduation's next week. And then Vegas. From there, I'm going to Kenya for a couple months to work with the Gridless team. And then moving in to New York City, where I'll start my full-time job on Bitcoin research with Galaxy. So I think that
Okay,
brings me
cool.
about 6 months.
Very cool. Okay.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about Gridless, what they do? It's a great story. I use that as an example of the power of Bitcoin mining specifically.
Yeah. So I didn't really, know this at first, or there's a couple of things here. Back to the Bitcoin teaches you about everything you didn't know really about the world. And so one message that Gridless really taught me in their story is how integral energy is for human flourishing and life. If you think about it, just you yourself, like there's no low energy kind of successful person on any definition of success. But we
Yes.
need energy to wake up in the morning and go do things. Same thing for our world as a whole. We need energy to have lights, cook food, all of that. And so that's, kind of one lesson, just more big picture. The second, I didn't really know anything between like what stranded energy was, like the power grid, any of those conversation topics. And basically, what Gridless does is they help bring energy infrastructure to people that otherwise would not be able to have it because the economic incentives do not align. And so what they do is they are able to capture stranded energy, or energy that otherwise is not being used. For instance, your average consumer isn't really going to take power from, like hydropower from a river, let's say. Definitely not here in the US. Most of us are connected to electrical grids. But where Gridless is in Africa, they're in 4 countries there, is they use hydropower, geothermal, biomass. I think those are their 3 types. And they, come take some Bitcoin miners and they help lower the barrier to people in these communities to have energy and access to electricity. So, for instance, in December, I went to one of their sites in Kenya, and it's at the bottom of a hill where a river is, and they have about 100 ASIC miners plugged in. And the surrounding area, they can provide power to about 11,000 people and like a couple hundred businesses. And so all of that would not exist how they have not been there. So basically, they just use the energy that no one else really wants to use, or it's too expensive, and they kind of the incentives all align. And I think, just for context, in Kenya, I think there's enough stranded energy to power the entire Bitcoin network like 5 times over. So, a lot of people think that someone else came up with this phrase, but if you're pro energy, you're anti climate, and that like being pro climate is anti energy. But this whole topic area has really added a lot of nuance to that and helped frame and explain it for me.
100% me too. If you are bullish on humanity growing and life getting better, we need more energy. So
Yeah.
Bitcoin, there's a whole nother podcast we could do.
Yeah.
And I'd love to talk with you in a year or so and hear a little bit about your experience. And Ella, I'm just so excited for your future. Thank you for contributing to the Bitcoin space. We're lucky to have you on the team.
Thank you.
And where can people keep in touch and follow your work?
Yeah, probably Twitter's the best spot. It's just 21mm for the 21st.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.